Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just give it a couple minutes here to let everyone get in the room. Numbers rising very fast. That's fantastic. I guess to start off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Erin McClellan. I am part of the Fable team. Just here to introduce the amazing group that we have joining us today and tell you a little bit about what to expect. We are hosting today's webinar on the accessibility advantage. So the conversation will really be around how accessible experience design unlocks business valuation and innovation. Before we kind of get into the good stuff, I will go through a couple housekeeping items. So the first thing I want to note is, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So this wonderful conversation and topic today is actually built off of a great report that is being launched today called The Accessibility Advantage that Fable has worked on with the Design Executive Council. So you will see that in your inboxes later this afternoon. This report was created alongside some incredible experts who have shared their insights in the report, and they're here to join us today to share these insights firsthand. So very excited to pass it over to them shortly. Also, two wonderful guests that we have joining us are our ASL interpreters. So we have Beth and Lizzie here today. And lastly, the session will be recorded. So there will be a version of this available later this week. In the bottom right of your screen, there's a QR code that takes you to the page that will host both of the report and the recording when it becomes available. But all of you folks that have joined us today, you will receive it in your email anyways. So don't worry about jumping there. You'll see it anyways. And then lastly, if any questions come up, we might not have a chance to get to them today, but that's okay. Our team will follow up afterwards. So please feel free if you have any questions or comments to share them in the chat or the Q&A, and we would be happy to follow up if we can't make it to them today. All right, that's all the housekeeping. Enough from me. I'm very excited to hand it over now to a very good friend of mine, Alvar, who is the co-founder and executive chair of Fable. And she is going to introduce Gordon, who is the founder and CEO of the Design Executive Council. Thank you, Alvar.
Thank you, Erin, for the wonderful introduction and also all the housekeeping. Welcome, everyone. I'm Alwar, co-founder and executive chair at Fable. I've been in the accessibility space for over a decade. It's a problem space that I am obsessed with, and I think we still have to make a lot of progress on, which is what led me to turning from designer to founder and starting Fable with my co-founder 8 years ago. And since then, we help hundreds and hundreds of enterprises make their digital products accessible. I met Gordon, I want to say over 2 years ago, and this has been something that we've been wanting to create for a long time. So I'm really excited that we got to partner with Gordon and the Design Executive Council on the Accessibility Advantage report. And obviously, we'll go through in more detail later. But Gordon, we'll pass it over to you to kind of share a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Alwar. It's been such a journey since we met. Why I was so excited for this conversation is, Design Executive Council's mission is to advance the strategic role and value of design leadership at the C-suite and board level. And so many of the people that we brought together in this room are part of our membership network who are working every day to figure out what does it take to really drive the benefits and value of design leadership and the functions we run to driving business value. And I think accessibility is such an important topic as AI is really transforming the space rapidly. So today we're going to go straight into that and showcase how Design Executive Council and Fable team worked with these great companies and leaders to really cover these topics. So we're going to take you through this journey, and it's going to go from positioning accessibility, really understanding how did it start, what were the language used, how they measure the business case, the metrics, the positioning, practicing accessibility in real time, how are they actually doing it, and then scaling accessibility across the enterprise because we're talking about global firms. So how they continue to maintain that business value as they scale and showcase that impact. And then finally, we all know how much change in our processes, in our roles, and even businesses at large as AI adoption is transforming the landscape. So we'll get tips and tricks from these folks about what are those frameworks they're using to integrate accessibility for this new era. So this is the journey we're going to go on across these five critical dimensions. And one thing that we really noticed doing this research, in which we spent so many months doing this, is the conversation is shifting. It's not just about a compliance opportunity anymore. It's really a business opportunity with measurable returns and the preparation for AI readiness. So we'll get straight into this to really expose what these case studies were. And this webinar is really focused on some of the highlights around the insights. There are so many more pages you will find in the report, so I really recommend you to get into the report after this webinar. Alwar, did I miss anything important here?
No, I think you covered it, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's dive right in.
So today's panelists, we won't go into too many company introductions because there's a lot of context, but I will spotlight really quickly some of the people that we have here. Many of you in the room are probably working across diverse industries, so we picked a whole array of companies to be represented and leaders both at the executive level and also at the director level to expand on how it's being positioned at the high level as well as how it's being practiced on a day-to-day setting. So we have Marissa, who is the head of digital accessibility and experience design from US Bank. She was also joined by Caleb Schmidt, who's the SVP Experience Design there. They will expand on the cases from a banking and finance perspective. We have Christina Goldschmidt and Cody Evol from Warner Music Group, really to show how they're driving that transformation in an industry that is moving so fast. We have Purvi and Jake from Target, a retailer we all know, to really showcase how some of those innovations are driving measurable transformations in the retail business as well as the customer experience. And then we also have Christina, Vallery, and Jamie, who come from the Cigna Group to showcase a healthcare setting example where compliance matters more than ever and inclusion. So these are our panelists today. We'll go straight into some of the sessions to expose, but I really encourage all of you to pay attention to just some of the common themes that we actually see, even though they represent different industries and companies. So the first section, we're going to look at how it got started, how it's positioned. So how do they make the business case to position accessibility as integral to business objectives? The first panelist we'll call on today comes from Target, and then we'll go into Warner Music, Cigna, and US Bank. Welcome, Target.
Oh, thanks so much, Gordon and Alwar. Thanks for having us. This is Purvi. I'm here with Jake, but I can go ahead and tell you a little bit about how we got started. So, accessibility at Target has been around for a bit of time, actually about 15 years, which makes sense because I believe WCAG has been around for more than 20 years or so. And so, longstanding leaders like Jake are really a huge part of our program's success. But early on, at Target's journey with accessibility, we were a little bit more on the reactive side, right? Needing to comply with regulatory considerations versus, actually choosing to create accessible experiences. And so over time, I've just seen us, Target, evolve in a really big way. We've shifted truly from that reactive kind of mindset more to that proactive, even more even into a innovative stance. Certainly, you can read about that in the report, but I know Jake is going to cover a little bit of that today as well. But I would just share that accessibility at Target has really become a part of our values, right? So at Target, we believe in helping all families discover the joy of everyday life. You might have heard Target talk about design for all. And so when we think about that notion of all, accessibility is really a core element to that. And I would just share that also over time, as software continues to proliferate, we have been increasingly moving accessibility upstream in our product design and development practice. And it's really not just about compliance or QA. It really means that it's how we work. And so if we haven't actually included everybody, and if somebody is still excluded, it means we haven't effectively finished the design process. So that's just one of the mindsets that we have.
Next up, we'll have Warner Music Group.
Great. Hey everyone. I am Cody from Warner Music Group. So when I started at Warner Music Group a couple of years ago, the company was going through massive tech transformation, and in that transformation, we were trying to unify a lot of our different products. So before I had started, tech was very decentralized, and there were a lot of agencies building separate apps and separate products to the tune of almost 60 plus different tools that the company used internally to do simple things like music distribution. And so, one of our mandates in kind of thinking about how we turn Warner Music Group into a more tech-focused music label was more around how can we centralize our tooling. And so, with that, we came up with WMG1, which is a central resource that we can use internally for a lot of the jobs to be done through our labels. And so we use WMG1 as a platform to kind of bake accessibility in from the very beginning. It's a really like unique opportunity to be able to start with something new and something fresh. And so rather than kind of treating it as a downstream requirement from the very beginning, we attacked accessibility head on, making sure that we really deliver a consistent experience across multiple regions and a global audience.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody. Next up, we'll have Cigna Group.
Hi, everyone. This is Christina Vallery. I'm here with Jamie Revelle, and thank you so much for having us here to speak about our practice. I've been with Cigna for about 10 years. It's actually 10 years this year, and Jamie has been with the group for 15. So our practice is something that we've really grown over that long period of time. I would say early on, we made a pretty intentional decision that we weren't going to lead exclusively with accessibility as a compliance requirement. And the effort that Jamie herself personally put in for this was to really focus on educating about accessibility as a rounded discipline across our enterprise. Jamie spent years crafting her material and her influence. She plugged deeply into the external community so that she was always learning about how the craft was evolving and bringing that into her education program. And the work that she really put in was all in the effort to inspire behavior change and to really change minds or to make minds internally. And I think we started to see a real shift in understanding when we sort of framed things differently, when we framed accessibility as a business opportunity, and that carried a uniquely ethical responsibility. So there was something that was a little bit different than just the framing of typical and traditional business opportunities. That really started to break mindsets. To some groups, accessibility had been nothing more than an item on a checklist or that it was its own checklist. So we tried to start that conversation, sort of anchoring it to opportunity and placing it where the leaders already were, where their heads already were. So we talked a lot about customer trust, about meaningful engagement, efficiency, of course, long-term understanding, and then growth, but all of the other things really came before that. We talked about how when you design experiences that work for more people, they work better for everyone. And then we anchored on our metrics that we could visibly claim. So we were showing fewer usability issues, fewer support issues, results that showed satisfaction, and then higher confidence from customers. And over time, something kind of deeper happened. I feel like accessibility stopped being seen as an added cost and it started to be understood as a quality signal. And this was really helpful because the team started leaning into accessible and usable design, and they were building more thoughtful and flexible systems. So it was almost like we were picking things up and spreading across the organization. It was rooted in that idea of that educational program. And then our metrics actually evolved into something that the engineers could show too, and that they started to claim. So they were looking at things like fewer retrofits, faster delivery, experiences that could scale across channels. And especially in our space in healthcare, accessibility really lands on a very human level, a very tangible level. It's not abstract, it's not arbitrary, it's necessary. It means whether someone can find the care they need, whether they can understand care or complex information, or they can feel respected or empowered in the moments that really matter. So I would say framing is a part of our responsibility to serve people equitably, and that helped us move accessibility out of the compliance lane into the ethics lane. And that naturally became something that was really central to us. And the evolution of accessibility and ethics in an AI empowered environment is something that we're really digging deeply into now. So if I were to wrap it up, over the last few years, we really emphasized a different turn. And we were starting to see another shift in understanding. And I think, Purvi, you alluded to this slightly. And that is that we're working on the premise that accessibility can really fuel innovation. So if we design for real human variability, that forces better thinking. And in our new world that is now breaking free from tools, processes, infrastructure that we've really been kind of contained to work within for the last few decades, we kind of have a chance to redefine accessibility over right now. So just in conclusion, where we've been at and where we're going, we move from compliance to value. And now we're moving from simple value to what I would call variable value and innovation catalyst.
Thank you, Christina. And US Bank, Marissa.
Yes, thank you. And our journey is very similar to Christina's. So when I stepped into this role of head of digital accessibility for experience design, the program was already successful. It was grounded in awareness, tools, and education, and it was intentionally embedded early in experience design and the product development lifecycle. So we were starting off with the product development lifecycle, making sure it was accessible versus waiting to development or even waiting to production. That foundation allowed us to shift accessibility from a reactive compliance activity to something woven into the fabric of our products, rather than addressed only after, like I said before, failures and complaints. To continue materializing and maturing into a top-tier accessibility program, we really focused on my team operationalizing and materializing accessibility in a way that the business could clearly understand and act on. We introduced meaningful metrics that directly connect accessibility defects to resource management, time to market, and overall productivity. And of course, in the beginning of that journey, it was a little shocking. But as we start to see people stand up, more champions grown, built into processes, procedures, those metrics started to show growth. And that's what you want to see in an accessibility program. Through our tracking for our metrics, we were able not only to look at metrics and look at the end result, we were able to capture data on possible potential defects identified before development, keeping our developers even more happier. They have less defects to have to work through by positive annotations and strong accessible designs. And why we were supporting these different teams, we captured information regarding the success criteria from WCAG that we use to provide that guidance. That allowed us to kind of create a training program. If we're seeing we're struggling around name, role, value, let's do a training program next week. If we're being reactive, it's not to be stronger, it's to be reactive to an educational opportunity. Once we started to get these insights, we started to share them with our business partners, our risk partners, and our design partners, making the impact of accessibility visible, measurable, and business relevant to all. Those metrics not only demonstrated value, they highlighted where additional education was needed, as I mentioned earlier, allowing us to continuously strengthen both capabilities and adoption. Ultimately, we've felt at US Bank over the years of our program that accessibility program is not compliance-led. It is education-driven, it's building champions across the organization, and enabling teams to deliver better products from the start. Our department, our specialists in our department, we don't gatekeep our information. We don't keep it inside of our heads. We share it through lunch and learns, through roundtables. Our whole organization, our design organization, went through a very intense several-week foundational A11Y training because we wanted to make sure that our designers were capable of producing accessible designs, even if the consultant was not sitting at that table with them. So over the years of building our program at US Bank, we started in education, and over the years, we have morphed really into tangible metrics and tangible operational accessibility. So we really want to make sure we continue to wove accessibility into the fabric of our products at US Bank.
Thank you, Marissa. Alwar, I think there are so many common themes that we see here around that shift from reaction to proactivity, from a place of fearing this as a cost center to one that actually drives and fuels innovation. So love to hear a little bit more from you before we shift over to the next section.
Yeah, I think these are common trends, and I know this has taken like decades and it's taken a long time to get from here. It's easy to say from reactive to proactive. It's easy to say from compliance to business value and being more customer centric. And it's great to hear these stories. And I think the part that I want to jump into is the next question, because a lot of organizations, struggle making the business case. And obviously, all of you are part of organizations that have been investing in accessibility for, over a decade. But maybe you can talk a bit about when you started with accessibility, but also maybe in this current climate of how do you continue to make the business case for accessibility and tie it back to business outcomes? We know that, in terms of population, yes, accessibility is important in terms of the number of people who live with a disability. We know that it's the right thing to do. But when organizations kind of struggle is how do we actually tie it to pure business drivers? And I'm wondering if we can hear specific examples from individuals on what were some of those business outcomes and specific business metrics that you were able to prove to your organization that the work you're doing is actually delivering business value and creating good customer experience. So maybe we can start off with Target, then go to US Bank, and then go to Warner Music Group.
Thank you so much. This is Jake from Target. Uh-oh, did I freeze up? Oh, good, I'm back. First of all, there's so many good nuggets being dropped already. I'm furiously typing here. I think this is a great question, though, because business cases need to be made to make sure we continue getting investments in accessibility. And what I would say is that at Target, we've seen really clear business results as we've embedded accessibility into how we build products. But I will be frank that early on, there was a real concern around would accessibility slow down how we do the work? Would accessibility stifle our ability to drive innovation? And what I would say I'm really excited about is that we, over time, have been able to prove exactly the opposite of that. So what we found is that when accessibility is embedded into the product lifecycle, we've seen improved speed, improved quality, and improved outcomes. So I want to shape that up for you, all of you, in terms of how that comes to life for us. As I think about business outcomes, I'm going to start first high level, and then I'll get into a quick example. So we see outcomes show up in 3 different areas, a couple of which are maybe a little bit unexpected. So the first outcome that we see is around innovation. So when accessibility is in those early conversations, we bring a different perspective into the room. When we're designing with people who have different lived experiences, it helps us uncover needs that would have otherwise been missed. And what we have seen time and again at Target is that this consistently leads to better ideas. And actually, in some cases, it leads to entirely new solutions or entirely new approaches to solutions that we wouldn't have thought of otherwise. The second outcome is around talent and culture, which I think is something that often gets overlooked. So we have seen that a strong accessibility practice embedded into our product squads actually creates this amazing culture of inclusion, care, and belonging. And this matters to UXers. I know that because I live within the UX world, but it also matters very deeply to our engineers and to our product owners. I mean, every one of these professionals wants to create meaningful, amazing experiences. But if you can do that in a culture that is inclusive and that is focused on difference, that's going to be an attractor of some of the best talent in the industry. And then the third, of course, is consumer experience, because that's what we're here for. It's been mentioned already on this call. Accessible experiences are more intuitive and easier to use for everyone. That's because accessible experiences reduce friction, which improves engagement and conversion, and that is what matters to businesses. That's what drives results. I'll give you one really quick example, and that's what we delivered with our accessible self-checkout last year here at Target. So we have been exploring this space and really trying to dream up, how do we make accessible self-checkout in mass retail accessible to people with disabilities? We hadn't figured out an easy solution for this, but that all changed when one of our engineers saw someone on our team who was blind struggling to use an inaccessible experience. And that direct human connection that he had made a real impact on him. He went home that night and he began tinkering, and he actually came up with a very simple prototype. And because accessibility is already part of our culture and our process, he was able to bring that prototype back. And that was really the catalyst that got us to really put this on hyperdrive. And very quickly, that led to a scaled solution that improves independence for guests and now represents a brand new standard across the retail industry. And that's now been implemented across our entire chain in Target stores. So maybe the last thing I'll lead you with is accessibility starts with inclusion for people with disabilities. But what we've seen it do is that it creates better experiences for consumers. It creates and builds stronger teams. And ultimately, it creates this culture where innovation can thrive that expands far beyond accessibility.
Thank you for that. Maybe you can pass it off to US Bank, Marissa.
Yes, thank you. So at US Bank, it was critical for us when I first started at US Bank for us to materialize and operationalize accessibility and not just advocate it. Even though that's important, we had to start to create a business case around accessibility. So that's what earlier I mentioned how we provide metrics. To do that, we had to create a documentation and measurement system within experience design that turned our guidance into measurable outcomes. Our accessibility experience designers, they document not only recommendations, but the specific WCAG 2.2 AA success criteria behind each decision. I know sometimes in our space, we don't write down our feedback, we don't write down our guidance, it's verbal. But it was important for us to materialize it so we can show the growth, but also show areas that we have some opportunities. We tracked whether feedback was applied, how long it took, and which defects were prevented before development ever began. We're starting to track that. We can start to show, hey, these teams were engaged with us in design. They had less defects to work through when it came to development, and they hit production in a faster time. There's been a theme across all of our presentations today. We want to show that we're not only stopping the process, but we're aiding to speed to market. We're aiding to productivity. Because for many years, as my co-presenter said earlier, accessibility was looked at as a roadblock or it slowed things down, but it doesn't. So these metrics allow us to show that story and actually help build our partners as they fold accessibility into their business needs. Once we started to have that great relationship, showing the metrics, operationalized, it actually shifted our accessibility from qualitative conversation to a metrics-driven discipline. I now could go into a team and say, hey, I noticed that you last two releases, we weren't involved. Look at the road to market. If we weren't involved, we could have really helped you in your development phase because we would have been able to identify some things that you should consider in design so you don't have these issues in development. And so that's why we're able to really keep our business partners engaged. We also started to make sure that our designers understood, what does a design look like? How do we make sure that they can have the tools behind them to build that business case for accessibility? We had to make sure our design partners were bought in and they had buy-in as well. So it was really important when they're talking to their product partners or the members of their teams, they could also advocate for accessibility and talk to it from a perspective of not a nice to have, or we have to do this, but we should do this. And one key thing we did about 3 years ago, Disability In put out a lot of information regarding the spending power of persons with disabilities and discussed the purple dollar, which is the village around a person with disabilities, their spending power. Bringing that to my business partners and saying, you're leaving money on the table by not making sure your products are accessible. This population has a spending power behind it that's number 3 behind 2 other large demographics, but it's growing. And we have to make sure in our businesses, we're thinking about that population, not from a compliance perspective, but also ROI. We get a return on our investment when we start to make sure our products are accessible. At US Bank, it's not something we create in a vacuum. We make sure that our accessibility efforts are shared and each person understands what part of the pie they own to make those products accessible. Although we have a very strong team at US Bank of accessibility specialists, we don't want to make sure that we're the only ones advocating for accessibility. So to make sure it's built into the business case and the fabric, we provide training, we provide those metrics, but we also provide an environment that has governance and oversight to make sure that the products are being made accessible in the way. It wasn't hard for us to build this business case at US Bank because it's built into our core values as well. So our business partners, at times there was friction, right? At any time, because as we mentioned before, people were in the assumption it made it longer to get to productivity or it impacted their speed to market. But with metrics, with strong partnerships and with education, we were able to tell a different story. And now we are woven into the fabric really early in the design process, which makes it easier for us to get to productivity smoother with less accessibility issues.
Thank you, Marissa. And we'll hand it over to Warner Music Group, Christina.
Great, thanks. Christina Goldschmidt, also with Warner Music Group. And the best advice I can give to someone who's trying to build a business case or to measure is to understand what matters to the people who you're trying to convince. So, the majority of my peers in leadership are actually all ex-Google. So, starting with something that they trust, like Google Lighthouse scores, so that they understand that we're trying to measure in something that they're used to seeing. I think that's something that can really help. Another thing is to try and move metrics that matter to other people so that you can show that accessibility is a driver of their business. And as Cody was telling you, we had this unique opportunity with a big digital transformation. And one of the things that happens with digital transformations is that they take time. And so the speed to complete that, the efficiency of our engineering team was something that was being tracked by my engineering peers, by my boss, by my CEO, by my board. And so to make sure that we can say, hey, we've built accessibility into our design system, and all of this is a great enabler of the speed and efficiency of engineering. And we can measure that through adoption of components of our design system and how it enables that team, makes it so that that's a metric that people aren't going to question and that people are going to be excited about and use. So when you can sort of do that, and like I like to call it hiding the vegetables, really getting somebody else to champion a metric that they didn't know they were even doing, I think really works. And the other thing that works at Warner is because we're in the music industry and adoption of our new products. One of the ways that we do that is that we make sexy looking business software because our label execs, our A&R reps, they want to use software that looks cool. And so if we have this ability to make this net new design system and make them great software, but the accessibility in it helps them do their work faster, but it looks cool. So they want to use that piece of software over an older piece of software that looks like it's from 1996. So that enables that design system to become the thing that everybody wants, right? And so you can make accessibility sexy. That's actually an option, especially if you're in an industry that trades on cool. So trying to do things like that and understanding the psychology of where you work, I think can really help in cases like this.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Marissa and Jake, for sharing that. I love the framing around just know your audience, know your stakeholders, and know what matters to them. And then being able to showcase that you're helping them win. Even Marissa's point of, giving the stats of like the spending power so that, executives understand, oh, this is a huge market. To Jake talking about, how a lived experience proved that this experience actually benefits everyone. Each of you shared some really great examples of how you've been able to get that stakeholder buy-in and prove that with the metric and progress that you're making. So I think that's going to be really valuable for the audience today.
Yeah.
Gordon, do you want to add anything before we move on to the next
There's
question?
almost like two words that stick out to me. One is behavior change, and that only happens if you know your audience and know what behaviors you need to drive. But the second, I think Marissa highlighted this so beautifully, is the shift from qualitative conversations to metrics-driven discipline. All of these examples showcase that sort of rigor that they had to deploy, but that only happens because they knew their audience and they knew what sort of changes they needed to drive and leverage metrics as a tool to drive that change and also embed them far more upstream because it's actually visible, right? And so I love that call out because I think across all these case studies, we just see this metrics discipline that is actually supporting a broader goal of behavior change within the organization and the leaders they're working with. All right, let's go to the next section. On this one, we're going to go even deeper on how it actually works in practice. This is going to be super important because we want to know, yes, there's these kind of to from changes, but how are they actually doing it? So we're going to call back Marissa from US Bank and then also Target to understand, like, what does that actually mean when you work directly with people with disabilities? And What did it reveal, to your teams that may not have been anticipated?
Thank you, Gordon. At US Bank, working directly with people with disabilities is over time has revealed gaps our teams would not have anticipated through standards or testing alone. Those lived experiences challenged assumptions on how users navigate, interpret, and complete tasks, especially in complex digital flows. To make the collaboration structural, we embed accessibility engagement into our innovation and design processes, not as a one-time input, but a continued partnership. We partner closely with our innovation teams to host assistive technology demonstrations and inclusive design innovation ideation sessions. Those sessions focus on solving real customer needs through innovation, not just meeting compliance requirements. One example I love to talk about is our mobile check deposit. Some of our consultants are native screen reader users or have low vision or other disabilities within our team. Our accessibility consultants identified a critical barrier. Although it had gone through testing, through tools and manual testing, they still identified a critical barrier for users who are unsighted or have low vision. Through that work and through the input of those consultants, we were able to get that process not only accessible, but better for all. That insight led to automatic image capture and voice prompts, improving task completion for all customers. Like I said earlier, not just for all. I always say when you solve for accessibility, you're opening the doors for a lot of other customers. We view accessibility as an innovation accelerator. When you start to solve for all those edge cases, the solutions often scale to everyone. For example, the same science that enables tools like IRA and other tools can support hands-free task completion through emerging technologies like smart glasses. So it always crosses over, but also by designing with accessibility in mind, we future-proof innovation and expand what is possible across new interaction models. Making this repeatable required governance, partnerships, and education, so inclusive design became part of how we innovate and not an exception. The long-term result that we have seen is better products, stronger adoption, and innovation that works for more people from the start, and we're not thinking of this as an afterthought later on. We're documenting it from the beginning and making sure it's woven into the fabric.
Thanks, Marissa. And for Target, how did you ensure accessibility consultants became a structural part of the development process?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. This is Jake again. This is a great question because accessibility is a really tough thing to solve, especially in a rapid moving environment. So to make accessibility structure a part of the process required us to intentionally embed accessibility into how we build the products. And so what this meant for us was shifting from this centralized reactive model, which we had early on, we were fixing live site issues. It felt a little bit like whack-a-mole, to one where accessibility is actually built into the work itself. At a super high level, what this means is we have accessibility consultants embedded directly within the product squads that are designing experiences. They're involved throughout the entire life cycle, which I'll get more into in a moment. And really important is that accessibility is not a checkpoint at the end. It's just simply a part of how we show up and work every single day. As I think about how do we make this sustainable, there are three things that I want to call out. One is early engagement. We all talk about shift left, but it is incredibly important to actually show up and do that. Accessibility brings ideas forward as we define and solve for consumer needs. Our team is working with designers and engineers before they start building anything. So we're sitting down with them and consulting and giving them watchouts of things that they should think about as they're coding or designing, helping dream up how we might solve some issues before any work goes into it. And what this does is this helps us broaden solutions, but maybe most importantly, we prevent issues before they occur, which is a big part of what allows us to move really quick, which is required to stay competitive. The second is around shared ownership. Accessibility is not owned by one team. Yes, our consultants are the experts and we guide and enable, but at the end of the day, product design and engineering are all accountable for delivering accessible solutions. Also, we're looking to scale the shared ownership through things like an Accessibility Champions program, which is entering our third year here at Target. And we're scaling this up across our global footprint. So this is something that's become very powerful for us. And then the third piece is around continuous validation. So how do we leverage humans plus technology? There's often been a big gap in technology for accessibility, but it's getting better, it's getting smarter. So how do we leverage continuous monitoring to really help monitor and maintain quality? I want to share just one quick example. I will not go in detail here, but a quick example that's simple and it shows the impact accessibility can have. So our accessibility team identified a checkout button that was inactive intentionally until a certain threshold was met. But the way that this button was developed and implemented, it created a blocker for assistive technology users. So we flagged it and we fixed it. And what we saw by fixing this was that sales increased by far beyond what we would have expected just simply from assistive tech users. So what that showed us is that we uncovered a broader usability issue. And this is intentionally a very simple example because this is what we see consistently. Small fixes like this add up to drive really meaningful improvements to the experience of our digital experiences. And so I think actually, as I was thinking about this, it demonstrates something really powerful, accessibility, and that is that accessibility is one of the most effective ways to identify and fix broken issues at scale, which makes accessibility that much more important to our organizations.
Can I build really briefly as well with one more example? So I have to give like a shout out also to Jake and the accessibility team for just the mindset of experimentation overall. We were redesigning the Target native iOS homepage last year. I don't know if folks have the app downloaded. It's very visual, it's very immersive. There's animations, it's a long scroll. It's a little bit inspired by, that type of scroll you might get on Instagram or something like that as well. But knowing that that scroll across industry hasn't actually been one of the most accessible kind of interaction paradigms, Jake led his team to actually run an accessibility teardown. And what was really, really neat is that he and our other leaders brought together product tech, UX designers, other folks, and actually had a demo of what those types of experiences with a screen reader actually felt like, sounded like. And it was just such a empathy building, seismic moment for us just to kind of get in there along with the working team and help them experience it firsthand. Cutting again those cycles around discussion, debate, etc., down just by opening up that process and trying new things through that notion of a tear down. So just again, I think especially in these moments where we've got all of these technologies shifting, changing every single day, week, that idea of experimentation is just such a big deal. So just wanted to shout that one out.
Awesome. Alwar, I think we should speed up just a little bit because I think we have so much more to share and I want to make sure every panelist gets a chance. So why don't we just jump straight to the second section? Anything you want to add before we move on?
No, I think it leads well to what we're going to jump into. So why don't we go to the next section, the next question. We're going to be talking about how accessibility scales. And I know Jake already touched upon this a little bit in his answer, but we covered, what got you working on accessibility in the first place. We talked about how do you build a business case, then to building a practice. It's a whole different set of processes to really kind of transition accessibility being owned by a small team to having every single team take ownership on accessibility. And so what I'd love to do for this question is hear on how did that transition go from that one team to multiple teams? And how have you made sure that accessibility has maintained its consistency and impact? And if there were any challenges that you stumbled upon as you try to, scale this operation. So maybe we can start with Christina from the Warner Music Group, and then we can go to the Cigna Group.
Actually, I'm going to throw it to Cody.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I love this question. It goes back to what Christina mentioned before about sneaking in your vegetables. So we definitely used our design system as an accelerator to really get shared ownership of accessibility. And it might kind of come as a surprise to some folks as well. Like we don't have a dedicated design system team or a dedicated accessibility team. We are all like trying to advocate for best practices through a culture of identifying folks who are subject matter experts around these things and really using them to help us scale. So with the design system, for example, we're partnering with our engineering organization to find those engineers that are very passionate about componentizing and component reuse and speed to development. And we're able to kind of work on the side with those engineers to kind of build in design system features and accessibility as part of those features. And similarly, we're also working with our engineering folks and also our internal design team to identify who our designers are that are very passionate about accessibility and very passionate about scaling accessibility across the organization. And so what we've formed is these cross-functional guilds that are not, their primary function is not accessibility or design systems every day, but because they're passionate about it, they're making fundamental changes to build this in a way that we can leverage it at scale for other teams to use. So really, it goes back to finding like across your organization, who are those people that are really passionate about these things, and how can you leverage the folks that you have in your organizations to really make sure that we get this like shared mission across. And I think the last piece that I'll add to it too is a bit of accountability. So from a design perspective, we are using our design critique forums to always ask questions like, are we building accessibility into this feature? Has your dev team considered accessibility as part of this feature? We all like to move really fast and build software really fast these days, but there are moments that we have to kind of pause and ask ourselves, are we building something that we're proud of that is actually accessible and hold our teams accountable to doing that at the end of the day? So we do a lot of that through our design critique culture as well as leveraging those subject matter experts to really be kind of the voice and eyes and ears across teams to let us know, hey, this thing needs a little bit more support, or this thing might need a little bit more attention.
Thanks, Cody. The Cigna Group.
Yeah, thank you. This is Jamie. It's been really great to hear about other people's programs. I've really appreciated that. A lot of what Jake was saying about around accessibility and practice really resonated and aligned with how we work. And I really wanted to plus one what Purvi said around exposing teams to lived experience, because we've also found that to be extremely impactful and a super important part of really growing the culture. So yeah, as far as scaling up accessibility practice, we have really found what has made scale possible wasn't really around growing our central team, but about distributing ownership through training champions and self-service, similar to the guilds that Cody was talking about, and really relying on pockets of passionate folks to be able to advocate and bring that support into the teams and peers that they work with. For us, the Center of Excellence means there's a clear central leadership with a specific mandate to set direction, raise the quality bar, make accessibility easier to do well across the enterprise. And at the center, we position accessibility as a strategic enterprise practice, so not a support function or a review service. So that means really investing in shared standards, integrated design systems, policies, training, consistent guidance, so teams aren't reinventing accessibility on every project. And so excellence at the center really shows up as clarity and trust. Teams know what good looks like. They have the tools and patterns they can rely on. They trust that guidance is practical, current, and grounded in real delivery. So the center becomes a source of expertise, foresight, and coherence, not a gate or a bottleneck. And just as important, we really intentionally push ownership outward, and that's how we see scaling really happening. Product teams, designers, engineers, researchers, they're accountable for accessibility in their day-to-day work. So my team, the Center of Excellence, doesn't own accessibility outcomes. It really enables them. Teams can move faster because accessibility is embedded early in design and engineering decisions, supported by our centralized expertise rather than blocked by late stage reviews. So in practice, this distributed ownership model has really changed behavior. Accessibility stopped being something someone like checked for or really started being something that they designed for. It became part of how teams think and plan and build, not a compliance moment at the end or a matter of trying to avoid risk. From a governance standpoint, excellence means designing governance that helps teams succeed. So setting clear expectations, shared resources, lightweight accountability, and visible executive sponsorship, creating structure without friction. The center really sets the bar in the direction, but the teams meet it through their everyday work. So that's kind of the balance, a strong central leadership paired with distributed responsibility, and what allows accessibility to scale. So not because one team touches everything, it's really not possible, but because the organization as a whole becomes more capable, more confident, more accountable for building inclusive experiences.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you both of you for answering that. I feel like even though your approaches are different, you're also leveraging some similar processes with the Warner Music Group, baking it into the design system. So not every designer has to think about accessibility because it's baked into it, but also creating space through the design critic where people can come, ask questions, make sure we're still holding teams accountable to that. And similarly with the Cigna Group, having that center of excellence that teams know that they can go to for knowledge guidance, but also kind of the center of excellence setting the expectations around what each team needs to adhere to. So a combination of that shared ownership, which I think a lot of companies can adopt. I also like that even in the previous question, a lot of people talked about how the lived experience is, one, like changing culture, but also changing the way they measure usability and CX and being able to have that tangible outcome. And reflecting on Gordon's, point earlier of that behavioral change, it takes so many of these different elements to kind of contribute to that behavioral change at an enterprise scale. So I think that leads Gordon probably to the next question really well, which I know is top of mind for you and all of us in today's age. So why don't I pass it over to you?
Yeah. And I think, one thing to just highlight as we jump into the AI section is like, we're all trying to drive change, but what kind of change and what kind of levers do you have? And I think this AI question is so significant, and I'm excited to have these two people expand on it because, it's a time where the floor is sort of shaking, and we want to make sure we set a durable business case for these types of capabilities so we can actually design that future with AI. So Cigna, I'd love to welcome you back because I think you have such a fantastic view on how you're setting up your company. Because if I think about your CUE, it's been around for a decade. What does that next decade look like? How are you setting this up? So tell us a little bit more about, what risks are we facing from an accessibility perspective? We're not considering or training AI models to build with this inclusion in mind.
Yeah, this is Christina Vallery again, and I'll speak to this. I think just sort of like plainly and bottom line, I think one of the biggest risks that people underestimate or maybe haven't found out about yet is how quickly AI is really changing the scale and the speed of change. AI at large, like just sort of like the intellectual disruption element, it really challenges everything that we've done in the last 20 years in general as people. It challenges everything we know. It challenges all of our work and our investments and the platforms that we've invested in. So the way I like to think about it is like we're sort of expanding, like as the floor is moving, as you said beautifully. We're also expanding the surface area for experience. So things like transparency, clarity, and accountability in a new world, they stop being nice to haves and they start becoming what I would consider to be accessibility table stakes. And then related to that, AI is bringing us these new delivery mechanisms, these new ways of experiencing things, new modalities. And that means that that surface area of coverage and distribution, that it exponentially multiplies. And then we're dealing with devices that really we haven't even been able to imagine before. So if things get really deep, really fast, I think if we were to pick this apart, we could. But if accessibility isn't considered during model training or system design, the things that are bad, things like bias and understandability or lack thereof, or a gap for usability, they don't stay contained. They become amplified across every interaction, every channel, every downstream use case, because that surface area is so much larger. And so we suddenly have a lot more on our plate. And this is one of the reasons why Jamie and I are really looking at expanding our consideration of accessibility as an evolution towards more established ethics. If we were to rethink accessibility as an ethical foundation and sort of beyond the interface, it starts to get super interesting. I think when AI agents show up, when voice is more prolific, and then when there are new kinds of wearables, it's really less about operating controls and sort of delivery and more about agency and understanding. And that is just something that we haven't really approached in a very open way before. If a system is acting on someone's behalf, accessibility means people need to know what's happening and they need to know why it's happening. Can they intervene? Can they override? Can they opt out? Or human oversight becomes sort of a core principle. And it's something that you have to do to support, but you also have to provide it. In non-visual or ambient experiences, our systems have to signal intent, they have to provide confidence, they have to set limitations in new ways. And then across new modes of delivering and conveying perception, everything sort of changes. So the idea of variability that we talked about before, when we're imagining variability, it sort of has a different meaning and it's more fluid. There's the idea of orchestration, and you may not know how the person will consume the experience until it's being delivered. So there's like this idea of dynamism. So that means that accessibility has to become adaptable, like our systems are becoming, which is a new prospect. So if I were to bring this back around to answer the question, and for the sake of time, in a new world that we are moving towards and that we're living in, when so much is different and really undiscovered, unimagined, untapped, when accessibility isn't considered part of it, I would argue that the stakes are much higher. And if it's not embedded early, AI doesn't just reflect that inequity, it accelerates it. So our answer is to, again, evolve towards a clear definition of an ethical framework so that we can ground to what our open functional expectations need to be, and then provide flexibility for them to evolve against those standards.
I see some high fives in the audience, Christina, as you're speaking about, sort of the broadening of ethics and inclusion and those broader consideration sets. Marissa, let's call you back as, sort of the last one. I know we're about 3 minutes away from the finish point. So help us wrap this up. Like, what is this preparation that you're doing, to drive the shift?
Very similar to Christina, we quickly recognize that if accessibility isn't built early in AI, it scales exclusion across every product, agent, and output. We started to realize that inaccessible AI increases late-stage rework, regulatory exposure, and delivery delays, which kind of goes against what we just stated earlier that we were driving to show we didn't do. And also, if we create AI tools that are not accurate or have hallucinations or don't have the good quality behind it, teams ultimately start to lose trust in AI as a production accelerator. In our department, we embraced AI. We have an AI team built only of accessibility specialists, and we also make sure we actually incorporate AI into our workflow within accessibility. We created an AI agent to support designers early in design process and embedding inclusivity from the start. This tool enables AI to facilitate accessible design practices while allowing our specialists to focus on solving more complex challenges. A U.S. bank utilizes AI to strengthen governance throughout the product development lifecycle, ensuring that accessibility is prioritized at every stage. That used to be a human's job, where we would sit there and had to look and we would miss things. Now we can partner with our AI tool to ensure that every single time a product goes through our PDLC, it's done the proper steps it needs to do to make sure it's accessible at the end. The human is still there in the loop because we never, ever want to make sure that a accessibility decision is fully automated. We want to make sure we still have that expert in the loop that can provide that guidance and support. At US Bank, we really want to make sure there's governance in the space of AI as well. AI is governed like design and tools through standards, checkpoints, and evidence. Prompts and agents are treated as governed assets with review and versioning. Within our agent, we have a whole process of how we review it, test it, pressure test it, and make sure we're getting the same outputs we would get if we had to still have a consultant in that space. Our humans remain accountable. Our specialists are still there. They are still supporting that tool. The tool actually provides a report that allows our teams to know what they should focus on when they do meet with the specialists with their designs. Accessibility also, when we start to introduce in the financial world into our customers, accessibility shifts from screens to intent, outcomes, and trust when agents act on behalf of users. We want to make sure as we start to engage and produce agents for our customers to utilize, we want to make sure that trust is still there. And that is done through governance and oversight and incorporating A11Y within our AI model. We also evaluate whether AI represents user needs and constraints and not just technical compliance. We want to make sure that it's providing that insight as well. Using AI for production support with strong governance, it also reduces our user-facing risk. We want to make sure by using AI, we are still mitigating risk and not introducing additional risk to our dynamics. We've always said, though, AI doesn't replace accessibility discipline, it exposes it. Strong accessibility foundations has made AI safe for us to scale at US Bank, and we look forward to using AI in the future to make our customers' journey smoother, but also our employees' journey as well.
Yeah. And, Alwar, as I'm thinking about the ending of this webinar, I really think safe to scale. Wow, what a powerful framing for as every company is scaling AI. Let's go to the next few slides because we're going to quickly wrap this up. For the audiences, you heard some rich perspectives today about these business cases, but these are only a few, right? And so inside this report, you'll see so many data points that will help you understand and grasp this material. And I'm really thinking, Alwar, the sooner you get these basics done, the better equipped you are to make space for these really critical topics on AI, right? Move from business case to actual solving these problems in real time. If we go to the next slide, just some quick notes, you'll see the 8 interviewees, 300 data points, 4 global companies, and 9 months of deep, deep sense making to really bring this report to life. And on the next one, Alwar, I'll let you end it here because I think this is really the main point.
Yeah, this is something that I've said before, which is as AI accelerates how we build, accessibility anchors on who we build for. And so without actively, practicing accessibility, we will be creating exclusion at scale. And these are points that have been said before. And so I think it's really important that, as we are in a changing landscape, that we don't undo the years of work. You heard from the panelists today. These are organizations that have been investing in accessibility for over a decade. It's important that we continue that investment, evolve our processes, but not forget about them or just remove them from our processes, because ultimately we will be ignoring users and that will have negative business impact. So appreciate everyone who shared all your insights today. I just want to end with a little bit about Fable for anyone who is attending who isn't familiar with us. We are an accessibility research platform, and we partner with enterprises to help make them build more accessible, usable experiences. And we do that by, centering around the voices of people with disabilities. So through our platform, you can directly engage with people with disabilities. In today's panel, we heard about how lived experience led to innovation, led to better CX, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that we help organizations do. We also help you benchmark and measure accessibility in a way that's easy to communicate that progress. And we know that it takes a lot of effort for organizations to build that internal capabilities, and our team can support with that training. But to kind of summarize, Fable's been doing this for over 8 years. We primarily only work with enterprises. So we have seen every variation of how organizations have approached accessibility. And so even if you might not be ready for practicing accessibility at scale and in this changing landscape, and you're just looking for guidance, reach out to us. We have experts in our team who do this day in and day out, and would love to share their experience with you. So hopefully with today's session, you got some real world examples of how organizations practice it, how organizations are navigating this change, and hopefully it gives you confidence in how you continue the work that you can do.
Awesome. On final slide, you guys can scan this QR code, get the report straight to your inbox, and I can't wait to hear what you guys take away from this. And a special thank you to all our panelists and leaders who have worked tirelessly over these decades to bring this to life. So thank you all to all of you and the team involved in creating this report. I will end it there, and I wish you all a really wonderful, happy Wednesday.
Thank you all. See you.
Thank you. Bye.